good way to describe what happened this Monday. For us, it was a sudden shock. It was so unexpected. We didn't ever think the price of crude oil would go to as low as $30 per barrel. So it came to us as a great surprise. These are very, very strong headwinds, and these headwinds reinforce the wake-up call for us as a country to look towards a life without oil. And the time to do that is now. But for all of us in this room, we have a responsibility to make sure that we don't spread panic, that we don't allow speculation, because that is what triggers a spiral which will not be in the favor of our country. We need to all put our hands together to weather this storm. This is not something that government can do alone, nor is this something that the private sector can do alone. It has to be a partnership, a very strong one. We need to work together to take the opportunities that this same crisis has provided for us. For us in government, there are some measures that we need to take which we have not taken, and this is the right time to take those measures. We're working as a government to strengthen our macroeconomic fundamentals, which some sectors of the economy were already weak before the crisis, so the crisis is only exacerbating the situation, and we knew about that. And we're working at dimensioning each sector and fashioning out and prioritizing the sectors, how best to provide fiscal incentives for the sectors to grow. There is no doubt that the combination of the crude oil crash and the coronavirus has put a very significant strain on the national budget, also on foreign exchange and also on many sectors. So we have been formed into a team, as said earlier by the CBN governor, by the president, to review what is the impact of the crisis on the national budget and also on various sectors of the economy, and to provide recommendations on how we can raise the revenue from the non-oil sector, block leakages, pull back whatever we have been doing that is not necessary, defer some actions and prioritize and fast-track others. We also, despite the increased dwindling revenue, need to still find ways to increase spending in critical sectors like major infrastructure projects, but also in health and in education. We have to also continuously work to enhance the ease of doing business. We are currently working to enhance the function, the trade facilitation function of the Nigerian Customs Service. We are working on an e-customs project that will soon be going for approval. And part of the e-customs project is to set up a national single trading platform that will enhance trade facilitation, ease the business of imports and exports into our country. We know that the major function of customs is not to generate revenue. It is to facilitate trade, and we're trying to work towards doing that. The Ministry of Finance also has realized that we need to do something special to be able to mobilize domestic savings. We have reached out to the private sector and some key government agencies, and we're setting up a national savings committee that is going to come up with a national savings policy. The essence for us is to have policy instruments that would guide the development of special instruments in the Nigerian capital market to enable large investors like pension funds that have patient capital, but also retail investors, so that we have every Nigerian being able to save with ease and have a variety of instruments that can be traded in the capital market. We have done a number of things that is meant to enhance business. We passed the finance bill. We made some legal provisions in that finance bill to drive and deepen the Nigerian capital market. We have introduced or reinforced the provisions on the real estate investment trust scheme. We've also made provisions to allow for securities lending. We've also been able to zero taxes for the smallest businesses so that businesses that have turnover of 25 million and below will not have to pay any company income tax. We've also reduced taxes for medium-sized businesses that have turnover of 25 million to 100 million. We reduced their company income tax from 100 million, from 30% to 20%. Why did we do this? We did this so that these businesses can grow. They will increase their productivity, employ people, and at the end of the day, they will be able to pay more taxes further down the road. We also have made some amendments in our fiscal laws to enhance equity, especially for the insurance industry. But we believe that enhancement will also benefit the financial services. We have made some adjustment to block leakages, especially in respect of transfer pricing, and to capture taxes from digital economy, which is not being taxed at all. There are quite a number of provisions that are meant to drive financial inclusion, to encourage informal businesses to become formal, to grow their businesses, so that when we have a growth, the kind of growth we desire is a growth that is broad-based and it is inclusive. I want to say that I wish I was going to stay throughout this session today, but I must apologize because we have FAC today, and I have two major papers at FAC. Fashola is looking at me. And I've seen the excellent selection of participants. I must congratulate the Central Bank for this second diet of this very important forum. I wish I was staying through the day to listen to all the discussions and gather the messages that you will be sending to government. But because we will not be here, I can only say that we're looking forward to the outcome of this program, because the outcome of this program will be taken by the committee that myself and the Central Bank Governor and GMD and MPC, Minister of Petroleum Resources, are participating in. We will take the outcome of this program as input into the advice that will give His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. A round of applause again, sorry. Well, Malam Abba Kyari's presentation will be at the villa tonight. We go straight to business on infrastructure. Because if we have infrastructure, it may dent economic crisis. So we invite Samala, the moderator of the session, Samala Zubeiru, to please come on the stage. The lead speakers are the Minister of Transport or Transportation, the Right Honorable Rotimi Chibuike Amechi, the Minister of Power, the Minister of Works and Housing, and former Governor of Lagos, Babatunde Fashola, the CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, Uche Orji, and the partner at Denham, who is an infrastructure specialist, Phil Sidwell, to join the table while I hand over the mic to Samuela. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this round table. I would like to move briskly because I know the ministers have a timing constraint for their FEC meeting. So I would like to stand on existing protocol. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So the scene has been set for us by the various interventions made by the speakers earlier in the day. We all know the importance of infrastructure. We all know that the objectives that we have for import substitution is the result of investing in infrastructure. We know that our objectives for monetary and fiscal policy are also the outcomes of investing in infrastructure. So Nigeria's most comprehensive vision for infrastructure is contained in our infrastructure master plan, which identified that we need to invest $3 trillion from the plan period, which is 2014 to 2043 in infrastructure. And we had identified that we need to invest 58% of that in energy and transportation. This is consistent with the trend that we see across the globe for infrastructure investing. In fact, it's typically around 80% that is invested in energy and transportation. So what we'll do today is just to get straight to the, I would say, substance of the conversation. Our panelists need no introduction. We have the Honorable Minister for Works and Housing, Governor Babatunde Raji Fashola. We have our Honorable Minister for Transport, also former Governor Rotimi Amechi. And we have the CEO of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, Mr. Uche Oji. And we have the CEO of Access Capital, Philip Southwell. You're all welcome to this roundtable. What I would like to do is to ask some questions, and then based on that, we would invite open questions to the floor eventually. So my first question actually will go to Mr. Uche Oji, who is the CEO of NSIA. I go to him first because one of the models for infrastructure investing is creating an SPV or an investment company that can aggregate infrastructure assets, and then you can scale that up through additional investments. You can also scale that up by attracting capital into that entity. So the federal government has set up the Presidential Infrastructure Fund, which is managed by NSIA. So Uche, can you just tell us what has been your experience with this fund? How have you been able to get the brownfield projects, which hitherto belong to government, into this fund? Have you been able to scale up the initial investment that you had with additional capital? Just quickly run us through that. More importantly, address the fact that there is this myth, or is it reality, that governments don't like handing over projects for engagement with the private sector.
Thank you very much. I think I will stand on existing protocols and go straight to business on the questions that Samala has asked. First of all, I have obviously the Minister of Works and Housing, who's a partner of the NSIA in the management of the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund. To describe that, let me just talk to three things. What is the PIDF? What's the funding? What's the governance and legal structure? And what are the commercial and exit considerations of the PIDF? Last year, I think 2018, the President created the PIDF to be managed by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority to address 5 critical pieces of infrastructure. These infrastructure projects have struggled to get funding or be completed on time. And these are projects that are under the Ministry of Power as well as the Ministry of Works. And these are the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the Second Niger Bridge, the Abuja-Kano Highway, the Mambila Power Plant, and the East-West Road. These projects, let me just say, are still projects under the Ministry of Works and Housing, as well as the Ministry of Power. In the case of East-West Road, it's under the Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs. The funding structure was as follows. The federal government was going to contribute some money into a fund to be managed by the NSIA. The NSIA will make its own contribution, and then the NSIA will take the responsibility of raising funding from external participants. And the funding was as follows: $650 million initial contribution by the federal government, another $650 million to be contributed later, $300 million from the NSIA, and $800 million to be raised from the private markets. The first $650 million has been contributed, and this is what is being used now to drive these three projects. The first three projects, which are Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, Abuja-Kano Highway, and Second Niger Bridge. We are very hopeful, especially given the conversations we've had, that raising the external capital will be fairly, not I won't say easy, but will be doable to get these projects completed on time. And the commercial considerations of the project have been already quite well defined, and we're feeling very confident as to where we are in terms of making those commercial considerations work. Now, in terms of getting the $800 million from external markets, obviously for the three projects recently, many of you are aware that the recovered funds from the funds that were recovered by the US government from former head of state, General Abuja, $308 million of that is going to be directed at these three projects equally to Second Niger Bridge, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, and Abuja-Kano. So in general, this is really what this funding structure is. What are the governance and legal considerations? The first governance consideration is that there is a tripartite agreement between the NSIA, the Ministry of Works, and the contractors to govern the projects. And there's a term sheet between the NSIA and the Ministry of Finance that governs the financial considerations. And over time, we're discussing an innovation agreement that transfers this into an SPV that the NSI will manage. So that's the governance and the legal structure of the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund. In terms of the commercial and exit considerations, obviously these projects will be told, and we're working on many other commercial aspects of it. But one of the most important things we're in discussions is to get a minimum guarantee income to ensure that there's comfort given to the people providing external capital. So far, it's been successful. I think many of you can attest to the speed of the work that you have seen on these three projects, and I'll let the owner of the project speak to the completion in terms of the timing of some of those projects. But they will then eventually be innovated into the NSI. Now, to specific questions, what is the myth? The transfer of projects. I think we need to be clear about a few things. One is the president, under his power, can direct the transfer of any project. And the Ministers' Powers Act also authorizes the ministers to actually put things like tolling. And so we need the Minister of Works has the power to make these things happen, and I'll probably let him speak to those. So far, it's been a good experience, and I think we are learning as we go along. But getting the initial legal pieces of work done was a bit more challenging. But so far, I think things are beginning to work out quite well. I think this is a good model. And it's a good model because we can all look at the financing structure and feel confident that these projects can actually be finished on time. And we're now looking to expand this model to many other key pieces of infrastructure that the NSIA is working on, be it in roads, be it in healthcare, be it in rail or any other sector or ports that catches our interest and can fit the commercial factors for us. One of the things the NSIA brings is to actually make sure that the financing of these projects are actually properly arranged, but also that the commercials work. And I think this is part of what makes it interesting and different from the other ways that we have funded. So I'll stop here and I'll say the following two things. One is, yes, the funding structure is as I have described, and we're feeling confident about it. The legal structure has quite clear legal documentations that has guided the transfer of this project. And we're very hopeful that the commercial considerations will work. But obviously, this is the first time we're having to take on projects of this size. And so far, we're feeling very, very confident. I think in terms of the completion time frame for at least the first two ones that I know, 2021, 2022, is looking very, very likely for us in terms of making sure that there's enough funding to finish these things on time. So it's a new approach. And I commend the government for being bold in doing it. And I think for the NSIA, it's been a very, very worthwhile effort to be part of this. I'll pause here and hand it back to you.
Thank you, Uche. So very quickly, Philip, you've had experience launching and scaling up infrastructure funds across many emerging markets, and particularly in Nigeria. We hear that you have been able to raise up to 50 billion with your partners in Chapel Hill, Denham. So what has the experience been? What can we do differently to be able to scale up faster? And how successful have you been in attracting pension funds to the investment in infrastructure? And are they really living up to the asset allocations that we know they have? So we know they have 5% for infrastructure private equity, and they have another 15% for infrastructure bonds. How effective is this, and what are the challenges that we can learn from?
Thank you very much, Samaila. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having us here today. I first visited China in 1986. I've been traveling there ever since. I look at a market like that, and I look at the incredible development of that market and their ability to pull hundreds of millions of their citizens out of poverty. And I experienced that with a sort of sense of awe in terms of what they've achieved. But they're not alone in terms of finding ways of developing countries and of growing very significantly. I'm too young to remember the aftermath of the Korean War, but I think what was interesting in terms of South Korea's development to an OECD country is the fact that in the first 5-10 years of their development, 60% of the economic growth that they generated came from 10 businesses, just 10 businesses. I think of Chile and its 25-year journey from developing country status to the OECD. And they were able to do this entirely by themselves in terms of finding ways of investing in infrastructure, diversifying their economies, and taking control of their own destiny. I applaud everything that Mr. Dangote has said this morning in terms of the importance of diversifying the economy. And I think the key lesson really has been around infrastructure. Infrastructure is effectively the core of the cycle of prosperity. With infrastructure, you can bring goods from agricultural production to markets. You can start manufacturing, you can industrialize, and so forth. But I think what's important is to think about ways of defining success for Nigeria. And I do think that we should be more ambitious in terms of what that definition of success can be here. If you read the examples of China, Korea, Chile, other countries, they define success with GDP growth of 10% or more per annum. For Nigeria, with population growth of 3%, it's incredibly important, to generate significantly greater GDP growth. And I think that sort of GDP growth is only deliverable if infrastructure investment grows by 15-20% a year. So I think there are 5-6 lessons that perhaps we can think about from other markets. I think one obvious point, which Uche has already covered, is the importance of transactions being bankable. That private investment and other investors will actually participate and support those investments. I think secondly is the important to lever the government, because if you're going to invest and increase infrastructure investment by 15-20% a year, the government does not have the financial wherewithal to support all of that themselves. So you find OECD countries who invest nothing in their infrastructure investment because they've created an enabling environment that allows that infrastructure to be built. And at the other bookend, we have the good work that NSIA are doing with organizations like PIDF, but which today are principally 100% financed by the government. If we'd taken that 100% investment and gone to a market like Saudi or Abu Dhabi, they would have used that as half of the equity investment, brought in debt finance, delivered $4.5 billion worth of infrastructure. So you need to find a way of blending this public and this private sources of capital. 2-3 final points, and then I'll stop, Samaila. I think it's important to corporatize. I think we all understand how corporates work. We understand the governance of those. Corporates can be listed. You can find other sources of capital in the future. I find it interesting going to markets like Beijing, finding that the Beijing government has 20 corporates. Half of those are listed in Hong Kong or China. They've been able to attract significant external capital into the plans they have in their own city and province. And I think that corporatization, helps bridge the focus of governments and development banks on greenfield infrastructure projects with the desire from institutional investors to invest in existing, operating, yielding assets. And I think to make these investments, one needs to find the right institution to do it. And I recognize that banks are incredibly important within the economy. But thanks to Basel III, thanks to the way that banks account for themselves, they are not the primary source of long-term capital for infrastructure projects. And that's very clear from the experience in the OECD. And I think it's very important for us to find ways of bridging institutional capital, into infrastructure projects. Final thing I would say is around currency. And currency is really what drove the work that Balaji and myself and Chapel Hill did around the infrastructure debt fund in Nigeria. Infrastructure assets are paid for in Naira, whether it's mobile telecoms, toll roads, power, and so forth. And so it's incredibly important that we define those in Naira. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. We are going to go back to some of the points that you raised. So very quickly, we know that our ministers are in a rush. I would like to ask a question and they will respond. First is to let us share with us your experience in engaging with the private sector to work with you to participate in the projects that you embark upon in your various areas, because you're all working on the key infrastructure that we require for the country. Following from that, you've all been governors and you've all embarked on similar public-private partnership projects. What has been your experience? What can we learn from that going forward? Because the idea is that we need to do things differently for more impact. Thank you.
Let me stand by the existing protocols. That's in Nigerian listening for, that's not found in English language. So let me stand on it. For us in Ministry of Transportation, there are two key areas. The first is to assist an NPC, and an NPC has not been forthcoming in this regard. The federal government has awarded a contract of about $195 million for security of the waterways. And if you had followed it closely, when this contract was awarded about 4 years ago, it took us just last year to start it. Because rent interest, those who go to an NPC and get those contracts of surveillance, following white men to platform, they fought that contract for 2 years, even after Cabinet approved it. It was cancelled, it was reinstated, it was cancelled, it was reinstated, until the fifth time. And that took us 2 years. Fifth time, the president said, no, Amici, I think we can proceed. So now we are proceeding. What is this contract about? We got some Israelis, and they are going to launch, I hope so, they're going to launch in the next 3-4 months into the water. When they do launch, then their responsibility, which they are doing now, is to train Nigerian security. This time we didn't leave it only to the Navy. So we brought in the Army, the Police, the Air Force, the SSS, and the Navy. Their responsibility is to stay in the water 24 hours. Because 80% of the insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea happens nowhere else other than under Bonny. They took 19 persons that day, one died, all foreigners. And we're spending a huge amount of money. So if you look, when I was governor, the American government visited me and said the Nigerian illegal bunkerers are the 7th largest producers of oil in Africa. I quote, American government visited me as governor, and that they make $7 billion a year. Imagine if that money comes into our coffer. then there'll be more money to award more contracts to do more infrastructure. Then the contracts that an NPC award. It's only in Nigeria where you have a company on its own set up self-anchorage area and ask vessels from outside the country to go there and as against the seaport that we have in Nigeria. So all that is going to stop very, very soon. The equipment have arrived. We have 2 vessels. We have 20 patrol vessels. We have 2 helicopters. We have 2 fixed wings plane. And where we are now is the due process for the local aspect of it. After that, they will launch because they've finished training the soldiers, they've finished training the naval personnel and other. Are we going to have more crises? Yes, because a lot of those rich men who make billions out of this business will be out of work. You know, if you followed it 2-3 years ago, they even went as far as saying, it's Amechi's contract tarnishing my image, but it's unimportant. What's important is that we're going to focus on it and ensure that business will not be as usual, and an NPC is able to save money for us in the Nigerian coffers. That's one area that I thought I should point out in the area of maritime, apart from the discipline and improvement in the seaport. But you see, it was Zangote that said it, the seaport should be for export, not only for import. And the more money you make from taxing things that come in, the less you do in terms of production. Having talked about maritime, let me go to the railways, which is what everybody wants to listen to. We have politicized railway. Everybody wants railway in his village without bothering to ask, what is the relevance of railway in my village? In fact, I'm taking one to my village so that my people will know that at one time I was once a minister for transport. Now, I continue to tell people, if you sneeze, they say you're a northerner. If you cry, they say you're an Igbo man. If you laugh, you're laughing like a Yoruba man. Everything now is politicized. And we, the minorities, they don't even give us a chance at all. They don't remember that I'm from South. I'm an Ikwere man. The Yoruba man is looking at me here. They don't bother about that. The railway from Lagos to Kano is about the busiest when you finish it. It will raise the highest amount of money for you in railways. It has the capacity to lift 30 million tons of cargo. Scientific study. So why should I leave that railway and go and do Port Harcourt to Maiduguri? But everybody is going to television, they don't like us, they hate the Igbos. Meanwhile, my name is Chibike Amechi. I don't know which is more Igbo. No, leave it to me first, they will get me some. they will get me some. I don't know who is more Igbo than me, who can say, I confronted Senator, the former Deputy Governor of Abia, what's his name, Senator Abaribe. I said, tell me the meaning of Abaribe in Igbo. It will take nearly 1 hour for him to tell us the meaning. But me, in 1 minute, I will tell the meaning of Chibike, God is power. Amechi, I know tomorrow. Easy. So I don't know why anybody who is Igbo would think I will look at the Igbos and not help them. But what informs Ministry of Transport decision is the fact that when you lift 30 million tons of cargo from Lagos to Kano, you create more jobs. Right? So why would I leave that and do Port Harcourt to Maiduguri? Now that we are almost coming to the conclusion of Lagos to Kano, we are coming to the conclusion because we have almost finished Lagos to Ibadan. Lagos to Ibadan is total of 1.6 billion, but it has gotten to 2 billion. Out of that 2 billion, to show you how responsible this government is, we are funding nearly $600 million. We, from the budget, and we are to the fiscal discipline. It's enough that we are paying, and the contractor, the only time we have not paid, and the Minister of Finance is here, and I've told her that she should pay me my money, because the Chinese are harassing us. So in the past 1 to 2 months, that they need their payment out of the 2 billion, out of the 600 million we are owing them. But we've been paying. The next thing is the rolling stock. The Chinese government asked us to apply for a loan for rolling stock, and the cabinet refused. So we can pay, and we've been paying $500 million. We are not paying that. That's from our pocket, and we've been paying. And some of those rolling stocks have arrived. You have the DMUs that have just arrived. We'll deploy one to Kano, to Kaduna, Abuja, and we'll deploy one to Lagos. Lagos would have been ready in May. Seriously. Unfortunately, nearly all of them that went for Chinese New Year were quarantined by their government. Their government said they cannot come back until they find a solution to coronavirus. Only those who didn't travel are here. And therefore, the speed of the construction has reduced. We are at the final stages of the $5.3 billion loan facility for Ibadan to Kano. We're at the final stages. It's just that they've just listened to us now and the Commission of Finance that we should connect Apapa to Tinkan. That's the problem when they are borrowing money. I don't see why I should connect Apapa to Tinkan. I don't, but they're insisting. So if you want the $5.3 billion, you must connect. That's another $200 million that adding to the $5.3 billion. So it may raise it to $5.5 billion. If you say no, you won't get the money. It was very clear there. Now, so when we start when we start Ibadan to Kano, it will create a lot of jobs. Just imagine how many people are both land speculators, businessmen. They bought all the land from Abado to Ibadan. They bought, and some are trying to establish industry. Some are asking us to give them what they call spurs into the industry they want to establish. The next one that President has just approved, and we're negotiating the loan. I was in a meeting on Friday about the loan. Is Port Harcourt, Bonny to Maiduguri. The one I say is about 11 million tons of cargo. Why did we get to Bonny? It was Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. Why we got to Bonny is because the President has also approved that we build a deep sea port in Bonny. So if you're going to build a deep sea port in Bonny, and I don't know when Minister of Works will finish the road from no, don't laugh now. I don't know when. So the Bonny road, the road from Bonny to Port Harcourt, and then from Port Harcourt to what's it called? Northeast will be difficult. So we agreed with the President to do from Bonny, with the seaport in Bonny, to Maiduguri, going to Yobe, Damaturu, and Gashua. But this is not new because there's no money. When we asked for the loan for the railway from Bonny to Maiduguri for between 11 and $14 billion, a company came and said, we can rehabilitate this railway at nearly $4 billion. The difference is narrow gauge 80 kilometers per hour, standard gauge minimum of 120 kilometers per hour. And if we don't have money, I can do with 80 kilometers per hour. Since we don't have money. That the President has approved. We've commenced negotiation, and I hope we'll conclude it. I'm actually hurrying that because it's been politicized. So once we start, those people who are harassing us that want no railway in the area can stop while we focus on that area. We are again negotiating a loan from Port Harcourt to Warri rail line as part of the coastal rail. The coastal rail is Lagos to Calabar. And I asked myself one question: do we really need Lagos on that track? Because the only reason why everybody is going to Lagos is the seaport. And in this part of Nigeria, there are over 4 to 5 seaports. So why do we need Lagos? I think, if I'm to advise the President, we don't. Once we get to Benin, the southwest can continue on the Lagos to Kano, because we can link Akure from Lagos to Kano, and that will completely knock out southwest from the coastal rail, and we end coastal rail at Benin and save money. That's what I think. The final one is one that we have awarded, but the contractor is finding it difficult to raise the money. That is from Abuja, passing through Baro, Lokoja to join Itabe. Because we have completed, we're waiting for commissioning, we've completed Itabe to Warri. It's completed. There's no seaport at Warri. The Warri seaport is old, so the President has also approved a new seaport in Warri, and we're looking for the money. Then there's one that, again, you have made it to become controversial. The one from Kano to, where is that village in Niger Republic? Maradi. Now, that's my idea. When we go to ECOWAS meeting, you find out that our neighboring coastal states are arranging to transport goods from other landlocked countries. So if we must be competitive, and if our seaport in Lagos must be competitive, there's a need to get a rail track close to, at least at Maradi, to enable all those who do business in that area, put their goods on that track and export through Lagos. That has not been approved yet, but we're engaging the President to give us approval so that we can do that. But those who want to fund it from Portugal are available. Thank you. I think I've done that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And let me again say that the question, I believe, was the experience with the private sector. And I would say that my experience was mixed. And in the road sector, for example, the story of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is very well documented. It was a concession for private sector funding since, I think, 2006, 2007. No construction work of any repute took place there until 2016, when we advised government in the heat of several litigation to take over the asset and fund it. The second Niger Bridge was also conceived as a PPP of sorts, again the same story, and visibly in 18 months or thereabout, when government has led the funding through a presidential infrastructure development fund, we now see the bridge heading very, very clearly towards completion. So what we see, therefore, is that perhaps people have bitten a little more than they can chew. And you can't disconnect that from the reality of our finance sector. And it's been very clear, people have repeated that we can't fund the size of the infrastructure we need to support the growth that we need to drive. On the converse side, of course, have been investments under the tax credit scheme. So we've seen the Dangotes playing, and we've seen NLNG playing. Again, when you look at the size of those companies, certainly they are the big hitters in the private sector sort of the economy. So you can put their money where their mouth is, and it goes back to the underlying point that it's really about funding. So how many of the people are businessmen who profess the ability to do A can actually raise the capital to deliver it? So yesterday we were reviewing some of the inherited private sector land projects, and we find about 54 that, because we have a PPP unit in the ministry, so which tells you clearly that we have a desire to engage. But what can people really do as against what they claim they can do and what the economy says? And so when you also look at the economy, I think my top of the head recollection is that 50% of this economy MSMEs. So really and truly, if people are turning over 100 million naira capital, what is the profit ROI there, and what can they reasonably then expect to invest in capital that requires billions of naira to deal with? So that's one experience. Of course, in the power sector, we also saw that, okay, we could deliver projects like Aria, Sabongari Market, Sura, and a couple of others. The amount required to deliver those projects were not in the order of the amounts required to build roads. And I think it's also important that when we're talking about private sector investment in infrastructure, we must continue, I repeat, to distinguish between social infrastructure and commercial infrastructure. So power plants are commercial in the sense that collection is quick, is easy, because this money doesn't come from pockets, they come from banks. And the cash point, so you will see a hesitancy perhaps in building a runway as against building a terminal building in an airport where there are footfalls for sales, vending, and so on and so forth. And that distinction must continue to be made. I have had the argument about tolls, and I think what informed tolls really is what is the traffic count and how soon do you expect to recover? Because if you expect to recover over a short period, the possibility is that you may price the toll beyond the willingness of the road user to pay. And therefore, does the outlay from the bank match the return period? Which bank will give you 30-year money? So these are the realities. I can give you the recent toll counts on Lagos-Shagamu, Lagos-Ibadan, from Lagos Lagos to Shagamu, we see about 40,000 vehicles averagely daily. And out of that, about 5,000 are trucks. Now, beyond Shagamu, it drops to about 18,000 heading to Ibadan. And as you go further towards Biniore, the count drops. Now, by the time the Lagos rail starts, it will affect the number of trucks that you see on that road. So when you are modeling for tolling, those are the things you need to do. So we just also did the 2019 traffic count, and we're analyzing the numbers now. But let me quickly again now go to some other issues. And to say, I think from what you heard from NSIA, the rail, one common thread, the rail is progressing because the money is there. Lagos-Ibadan, Second Niger Bridge, and Abuja-Kano are progressing because the money is there. So the big elephant is, how do we find the money? And I think that is why I have come here. So when I was invited, I think I'm going to leave. I will leave a presentation I made. I have the e-copy. I'll leave it with the governor of Central Bank before I leave. But just to dimension for us that the critical routes are the A1 to A9. And all of it is here. Those are the routes that lead from the ports, from the Lagos, Warri, Port Harcourt, and Calabar ports to the Savannah and to the border of Niger Republic and Cameroon. If we make those roads work, they go up and down, A1 to A4, and they go left to right, east to west, A5 to A9. If we make those roads work, then we've really scored a dent in easing transportation by road across Nigeria. Now, within that road network, we have about 100 different sets of contracts because they are long roads, some of them 200, 500 kilometers. So one contractor usually doesn't get to do all of it. We break them into sections of 100, 150, and so on for efficiency and pooling of resources. So we have about 100 such projects within that network that are at 50% to 90% completion status. And they will require about 288.721 billion naira to finish. And I hope the governor of Central Bank takes note of that figure. Because if we can raise that money, then we can finish those roads. 228,721. On the average, what we've seen from our 2016 to our 2020 budget is that we're getting just under 50% budget releases. So, and that speaks again to the challenge that the minister has had to deal with, raising revenues in order to fund infrastructure, and also seeking to borrow, of course, then managing payback and so on and so forth. So I think I should quickly sidestep from that. There are alternative sources of funding, of course. The Sukuk, the PIDF fund is one of them. The tax credit is another that I've mentioned, and the China Exim and the AFDB, who are also represented here, have also assisted in that regard. The other point I wish to make, and which is somewhat outside my brief, but again, is to say that I think it's a good thing we are all here. I see the finest and the brightest of Nigeria's human capital and leadership here. And that really makes me excited to be here. And I think that we can make this team do a lot more beyond a one-day session. This must be a continuing engagement, because I say that because these are tough times, but they are also good times. And this crisis, we shouldn't waste it. It's bad enough to have a crisis, but it's almost unforgivable to waste one. And so for me, this crisis may produce Nigeria's finest hour, really, if we put this capital that is here to use. And I've heard a lot on diversification, and I've just said, what are we really doing? So I'm going to start with that thing next to Aliko, that sanitizer. You know, I've taken time to read it when I read through it, because I washed my hands with soap and water before I got here. And they gave me this thing, and I didn't want to break rules, so I used it at 2 points. Something told me that we were all probably doing the wrong thing. The first thing is that thing is a bacterial sanitizer. We're dealing with a virus. And it's important to make this point. We're dealing with a virus. And so, before we rush off in a hurry, the thing there is, we must not panic. That's the message there. We must not panic. And we must know what it is we are up against and constructively then engage it. Because if this capital here, this human capital here, constructively engages these tough times, we will defeat it. So the second point is that I notice it's made of berry and alcohol. And I know that berry, whether it's raspberry or whatever, grows wild on the plateau in Jos. Wild. And this is important because that thing was made in China. The other component of it is alcohol. So why is our ogogoro illicit? No, I make a very serious point. I do not trivialize this point, please. Why is our ogogoro illicit and golden gin and rum and schnapp are not illicit? But they contain the same basic chemical component of alcohol. And I say, therefore, why are our MSMEs and industries not already producing these sanitizers for us to use in Nigeria if we really need it? So these, for me, are the opportunities here. On one of our construction sites, as he has pointed out, not only is manpower from China, where we're using Exim loans, finding it difficult to return, equipment is finding it difficult to come in. So one of the things I've said to them, look, there are people, local people here who have trucks. Employ the trucks, put your Chinese label on it, and let local people also benefit. My closing story, therefore, is that this is a fine hour for us to introspect and turn this around for our own benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Honorable Minister. I don't know if you have time for follow-on questions or you have to leave now. Okay. So very quickly, just before you both leave, if you can just
panel discussions taking place so far by plenary and other talks delivered at the moment indicate that the solution to Nigeria's problems are not far-fetched. They are recommending promotion of import substitution in foreign exchange by supporting companies that provide close substitutes. Local production is another area that discussants are expecting the Nigerian government and people to embrace. Of course, improving competitiveness of made in Nigeria goods will go a long way to promote local production. So far, discussions have also centered on financing infrastructure development driven by development agencies. Critical components of recommendations made in this regard involve development of power and road infrastructure. Achieving conducive interest rate regime is also another recommendation made by discussions and discussants so far in the Going for Growth consultative round table. Of course, experts are also advancing the promotion of financial inclusion to take inclusiveness from 65% to 95% by 2024, bringing more people into the economy where they can have savings, insurance, and pension as active participants in funds and revenue generation as well.
We have money, $12 billion now waiting. You can take it now, just call Minister for Finance. I say I will call Minister for Finance. No problem. Just go to CBN, open an escrow account, drop $1 billion there. If you drop it there, and I won't even call Minister for Finance, I'll go straight to the President and say I have seen $12 billion. You won't see them again. Because I have already been trained to the fact that the only place I have seen privately constructed railway is no more than 100 meters, and that's in America. The rest are by government. However, operations, yes. Operations, they come in. Now, there's a Nigerian who approached me in Sochi and said, I will bring rail buses. There's a difference between rail buses and locomotives and coaches that will operate Lagos to Ibadan and compete with NRC. I told him to apply. He has applied. We are going through the process. Once he meets our requirement, we will allow him to compete with NRC. There are sufficient passengers from Lagos to Ibadan. When we complete Ibadan to Kano, and rail buses don't go too far, but if his rail buses can go to Kano, we'll still allow him to do that. The next private thing we've done in the private sector as far as railway is concerned is the issue of e-ticketing, where the young lady funds the equipment, does everything, collects the funds. I think we approved 20% for her, 20%, and the rest goes to government. In terms of construction, and that's where you will see that nobody can do PPP in railway. Well, there's a PPP that we approved for Abuja to Itape. Now, I remember what the Minister for Trade then said to me. He said that, Mechi, if you pull this PPP through, you'll be the first man in the history of the world to have pulled a PPP in railways. So the Chinese company came, we'll look for the money, we partner with you, 80%, you bring 50%, we will bring 5%. No, you bring 15%, you will bring 5%. Then 80% will, as SPV, we borrow the money. We say we are ready with the 15%. They lured us into an EPC contract, which we approved in the cabinet. But cabinet was smart enough to say, this EPC contract won't proceed except they sign an agreement with us that they will run this railway, recover the funds, and pay back the loans. And we will not give our guarantee except they give us a backup guarantee that if they call up our own guarantee, we'll call up their own guarantee from their bank. Since then, we've been holding nearly 50 to 100 meetings and we're not making any move forward. I've been thinking about, do I need to go back to cabinet, which is what they actually want, to go back to cabinet and actually award that contract to them. And even if we are going to award that contract, it can't be to them anymore because we are trying to play smart. So you see that the Chinese company is there because they can't raise that money. It's $3.9 billion, including the seaport. Not too big. But they can't raise that money except we give them the guarantee without a backup guarantee from them. Because their bank is willing to give. What the bank is saying is that they are sure that they can do the construction. I say it's not about construction. It's about after constructing, you have to run this thing and make back this 3.9 billion without any impact on sources. So that's how it is in the railway and the private sector.
Thank you. The Abuja-Lagos Highway is one of the 9 Trans-African highway projects. So there are 9 other projects by African states trying to link themselves together by road and other networks in the way that other continents have done. Where we are at now is that we are conducting feasibility and related studies funded by AFDB, and we are hopeful that those studies would then inform designs. But to be clear to the members of the audience particularly, is that the road network already exists. So what we're trying to do is to see opportunities either for expansion, improvement of the pavement quality, and also more efficient management of the different borders that serve to facilitate trade between an estimated 30 million people. It's a 1,080 kilometer road network from Badagry, comprising Lagos, Benin, Togo, Republic of Ghana, onto Cote d'Ivoire. Incidentally, it was put together by a committee of the heads of states of those 5 countries, and Nigeria chairs that committee, and the Ministry of Works represents Nigeria in the Ministry of Ministers, and we meet almost quarterly. So that's where we are at. So we can use every help that we can get. And let me point out that perhaps the more vulnerable countries who would have challenges with financing their own sections of the project, and I use the word vulnerable advisedly because of the size of the economies, are the republics of Benin and Togo, because between them they have about the longest stretches given the relative size of their economies. Lagos has only about 70-something kilometers of that portion. So we've been thinking about how to roll this together so that we can support them to be able to execute their own portions. At the Lagos end, what we're doing now, we have a contract already in place that is being executed at this time, working with also what the Lagos State government is doing, so that at least we can make that connectivity seamless while upgrade can follow in the long term. If you permit me, before I yield the microphone, I just would like to pitch on the back of the question to Minister Amechi about private sector managing or taking over. And I think that's eminently sensible. It also speaks to the sense of the risk appetite that private capital sometimes has, especially dealing with local issues, community issues, compensation issues. And I tell the story of one project where a contractor left site because, according to him, they had put some occult things and I said, oh, go and give them money, the occult will disappear. So those are things that, and it truly happened that occult accepts money. But those are local issues that may, but on a serious note, once the asset is then built, the opportunities may be much more attractive because the risk is mitigated. And I tell people privately that if I was still governor of Lagos today, I would have offered the Lekki Bridge for sale by now, because my interest now is just to ensure that people can cross. But that said, there will be governance and service level agreements, the minimum levels of maintenance that must be maintained by whoever acquires the concession. And also, there will be some regulations about how you manage tolling, and subject to certain approvals in order to ensure some level of consumer protection and manage profiteering. But this is the time for government to raise money for anybody who has the money, buy the bridge and put the bridge to do other capital assets. And thinking along those lines, I just say, while we are gathered here, it is said that there's a lot of Nigeria's money abroad. And I see a lot of lawyers here, and I see a lot of people here. And we are dealing with legal regulations and regulatory regimes that were obviously applicable when the money was leaving. And I think this is a time to rethink our strategy. And the central bank and those who know, and it will be my enormous privilege to be able to contribute something along that. We must find something that is more attractive for that capital to head back home. And I think there's a lot that can be done about that. And jurisdictions in South America have moved in this realm, and opening windows of no questions asked, immunities from prosecutions within a window, let the money come back in and come and work from where it was taken. There are ways that this can be done, and it's been done before. So these are the enormous opportunities that exist, in my view, at this time that we have a crisis. But there are issues that have to be balanced within the politics. Oh, is the government abandoning? Is that corruption? And you see, those are debates that we can have. But I just thought I should drop that here before I leave. Thank you very much.
Let me call attention to what an MPC people should do. When we were to bring in the metals, the iron for the tract, huge amount of money, just to move it from China to Nigeria. And I was excited to support the Nigerian company that has a shipping line to bring it from China to Nigeria. And you know the response we got? No. There's a Chinese law that says only Chinese vessels can carry Chinese cargoes. No, we have that law. But an MPC, or Ministry of Petroleum, has refused to implement it, even though it's a law from Ministry of Transport. An MPC says this CIF, whatever you call it, and FOB, whatever you call it in the ministry. Meanwhile, the law, free on board. Meanwhile, the law says that, the law in Nigeria says calls it national cargo, and defines national cargo as cargoes from local government, state government, and federal government. Now, if you want to encourage private sector investment in Nigeria, then that law must be implemented. In fact, when I became Minister for Transport, I did announce to the country that we will establish a national shipping line. So, what does the law say? 60% investment from Nigerian investors, 40% from foreign. We traveled to Singapore. The foreign company in Singapore was ready to invest. We came back here. Till today, no Nigerian has brought one kobo, even though we set up a committee for that purpose. That's why we don't have a national shipping line. And their argument is this: do you assure us that if we put our funds together and bring 60% of the funding, and the private sector brings in the foreign investor brings in 40%, we can carry national cargo? Because the moment they can put the investment together, they are entitled by that law. I think it's cabotage law, what you have the law. They are entitled by that law to carry a Nigerian flag. It becomes a Nigerian flagged ship. And once it's a Nigerian flagship, it's entitled to all national cargoes by anybody who belongs to any of the tiers of government. But I think that an MPC needs to talk with Ministry of Transport. Let's see how to implement this law so I can encourage private investors in the maritime sector. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So I think the governor wants to say what? 1 minute?
Well, thank you very much. Before the ministers leave, I just thought I should intervene on the issues that they have raised, and maybe thereafter we can allow questions from the audience. Well, I thank Samaila for raising issues regarding whether if the private sector, the banks, AFC, Sovereign Wealth, maybe if we bring in African Development Bank, whether, for instance, Minister Fashola will be willing to hand over, say, Lagos Ibadan after it is completed as an equity, right, that will now help in funding the 288 billion naira that you just talked about, and also really the willingness of the public sector to hand over these roads for the good of Nigeria. And I thought before the ministers leave that we should thank them for the word eminently possible for this to be handed over. But I say this because we had held meetings. Indeed, the presidency had written a letter to yourself, myself, and I think finance, listing a number of roads that they think needs to be built, and that there's a need for us to proffer advice about how this can be done. We had held meetings at the Bankers Committee, and we responded to the presidency about the willingness of the Bankers Committee working with African Development, AFC, African Finance Corporation, Sovereign Wealth, and maybe African Development Bank, if they are willing, for us to really put this together into a pool under an arrangement that will be managed by AFC and the banks under some form of structure where these roads can be built. And I imagine that with the kind of intervention that the Minister of Works has made regarding its willingness to work with us, I believe that this should be part of our interventions today that should actually go to the President this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, we're not. Mr. Melekere, do you want to react to the comments before we continue with the session?
Yes, thank you, Honourable Minister. I think I will be very specific, and as the photo session goes on, I would just like to say something very brief about the freight. Honourable Minister is talking about delivering cargoes to destination and the customers coming to pick cargoes from our country. And there's indeed an engagement to ensure that we can deliver cargo to destination. We have a big challenge, which is a commercial challenge. We have a number of litigations all over the country from local governments where whenever there's an international judgment against this country or in a local government, they can put lien on any cargo that is originating from our country. As we speak now, we have a $2.9 billion litigation asking for lien to enforce those judgments. And one of the things they can easily attach it is the cargoes that are originating from this country that is carrying our own label. And that's a big policy decision that we have to make, that if we can take this risk. And the second part of it is to hedge for this cargo. And this is also a policy decision that is not also within the purview of the NMPC. So there's really no issue around NMPC refusing to implement. We'll engage the Honourable Minister. There are policy issues which he will help us to resolve. And so once we do that, we'll be very happy to deliver cargo to destination. Countries that do this are different. They have locations where they take this crude oil for processing in external locations, their own refineries in other locations, and so many other infrastructure that is not for this meeting. But Honourable Minister, I assure you that I will engage you, I will come and meet you so that you can help me to take this to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I would like some response, to the... Yeah, just one last follow-on question before we engage with the audience. So just any remarks you want to make, you can do it in any order, starting with you, Uche, from the comments made by the ministers on their willingness to engage with the private sector and their willingness to cede brownfield assets to a construct that can mobilize capital.
I will probably react in the following two ways. The first is the PIDF is a halfway house in terms of taking assets from the Ministry of Works or Ministry of Transportation into the private sector. And I mean that in the following ways. There's a Lagos-Ibadan Expressway Development Company owned by the NSIA, into which this road will be then transferred. Part of the whole collaboration is the NSIA is funding it, and as we go through a number of things, then the project can be transferred. But let's also be a little bit careful about transferring assets from ministries. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, some of these projects have legacy debts that over the years have not been paid. And so when you're going through the process of transferring them, you have to resolve some of those. And these are real challenges that we are facing today. So you have a certificate that was completed in 1980, 85. Or maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but let's say 1999 or 2005. And then you're transferring the asset now. And some of those certificates are still outstanding. Going back to do a reconciliation and ensuring that what you're paying for makes sense is a challenge. The second aspect is obviously some of these contracts are also not contracts that are suited for private sector taking over. And that's because when a private sector company does an infrastructure project, it does what is called a silver book type of arrangement, which transfers the construction risks to the contractor. But the Ministry of Works contract will not be in that manner. So these are real practical challenges, and I can only say that because we're going through some of those now. But they're not difficult to solve. They just require time and energy to solve them. And then the second thing is, I think with the PIDF, because the NSIA is an entity owned by the government, but it also has private sector characteristics, it provides a level of comfort in making this transition happen. And then to Phil's point, and I get your point, at the moment it is being funded by government and the NSIA, but the PIDF is structured such that 30 to 40% of the capital will come from the private sector. It's a phased approach. The money is being spent now It's government money, yes. NSIA's money, yes. But the capital raise will come later from the private sector. And why are we doing that way? Well, number one is because private sector capital is expensive. And so private sector capital will also come when they believe there's an element of de-risking of the project has gone through. So if I look at Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, right now, I think over the weekend, there were discussions we're having about how do we accelerate Lagos-Shagamu, okay? Because if you complete that and then invite private sector entities to bid for it, they can see a completed road, but that allows you to recycle the capital to then take on Shagamu to Ibadan, Abuja, Kano, second Niger Bridge. So some of the things we want to do. The second thing, and something I should have pointed out earlier, one of the lessons of the PIDF is also the need for us to mobilize domestic capital. I know there's a lot of talk about foreign capital, international capital, but international capital is dollars, and that has its implications, especially when you're talking about roads or domestic infrastructure. But there's a lot of capital locally. The real advantage of having 190 million people is that if we pull our resources together, we can actually solve some of these problems. I mean, India today does not go around looking for who will help them build roads, because out of 1.1 billion people, you can mobilize that capital locally. They're not very rich people, but they can mobilize it locally. So there's the need for financial inclusion and making sure that we get everybody into the sector that would allow us to contribute to fund infrastructure with local money. And to that extent, the second lesson is, and it's something that's been talked about in the press without people really understanding it. We are part of the committee that's working on seeing how the pension funds can work with the government and with the NSIA to fund infrastructure. No one is raiding the pension funds. Actually, that committee has pension fund administrators as part of crafting a solution. And what is the solution? Some key roads, some key projects will be transferred into a vehicle that the pension funds themselves will be part of the project development, and they will decide whether they will invest in those projects or not. And let me speak to some of those projects. We're doing Lagos-Ibadan Highway. We're doing Abuja to Kano Highway. But between Ibadan and Abuja, you cannot drive to Ibadan on good roads, then from Ibadan to Abuja on bad roads, and then get there and they ask you to pay toll. We must complete that corridor. If you do that as a whole corridor and as a portfolio, the cost of tolling across that corridor comes down. The same thing for Second Niger Bridge and Lagos-Shagamu. Shagamu or Benin all the way to Asaba to the bridge is one long corridor. So these are some of the areas we're now looking to see if we can backfill. Because if you do that, then the cost of tolling becomes lower. The third thing that we bring through PIDF is long-term capital. We're looking at 25-year investments to 30-year investments in these projects. That way also the cost is lowered. So yes, some of the points made by the ministers, a lot of it is correct. Private sector will not come in now because sometimes the private sector capital doesn't have a tenor. The legal environment is a little bit complicated. But I think the PIDF, as managed by the NSIA, is providing a template for how you can have a seamless transition from the government into the private sector. There are just some things you have to deal with on a practical level. You know, the nature of the contracts, the legacy dates around the contracts, and the real politics of actually getting some of the people in the ministries to hand over the project. That wasn't talked about, but it is true and it's real. You know, but I think the NSIA playing a role is helping. At least let's get these 3 projects, or eventually 5 projects done, and that will get us, you know, to a level of comfort. I'll stop there.
Okay. Thanks, Uche. I'll take one international example and you talk about that and the potential applicability here in Nigeria. And that's the example of Clifford Capital in Singapore. Clifford Capital in Singapore has one job, which is to build infrastructure, you know, for Singapore and you know, to do that with Singaporean institutions. The government has defined what are the types of infrastructure assets that Clifford Capital can invest in and support. And then Clifford Capital as an institution is equity financed in the majority by Singapore financial institutions. So since we're sitting here in the central bank today, you know, thinking about a structure where the banks, you have the majority of an institution like that, and is able to bring private and external finance to work alongside the government, I think is something that is something we should all seek to achieve. What it also does is has the ability, obviously just to a limit, to issue debt that's guaranteed by the Singapore government. 100% of that capital raised goes into infrastructure. It doesn't finance salaries or interest expense or other expenses of the government. 100% goes into infrastructure. And Clifford Capital is listed. So every quarter, every half year, every year, their finances are public and transparent. So I think one of the things that we potentially could think about in our plenary sessions after this is not a question of either or. I think everything that PDF and so forth are doing is fantastic. Is finding ways, though, to find institutions that are complementary to that can address a wider investor base. I think every day of the $84 trillion of institutional capital globally, and what is it we can do to bring more of that here? And final point around that really is around currency. I personally think you need to finance your infrastructure in Naira. Foreign institutions invest in Dangote Cement. They invest in GTB, in Access Bank, in Zenith Bank. And they are bringing dollars and investing in Naira. That there is no issue, I think, around that particular issue. And so I think it's really important we do that. If we try and fix the power sector with 100 euros, it will bankrupt the country. We need to find a way of financing in domestic currency.
So before I throw open the floor, the questions to the floor, I want to make some quick comments. So the central bank has done something similar to what is proposed. They entered a partnership with financial institutions to create the Africa Finance Corporation, which was seeded with $1 billion of capital 12 years ago. Today we are at $6.1 billion. We are rated A3 by Moody's, so it means that we can significantly reduce borrowing costs when we raise capital. And we have deployed over $7.3 billion across 30 countries in Africa. So a construct like that can work towards what you're talking about. Like mentioned before, AFC can partner with SIA, as we have done to create infra credit, to try and de-risk opportunities for pension savings in infrastructure. So the institutions exist. We just need to talk to each other. We will find the solutions. We also have the capacity to extend the tenor of borrowing by local banks. So if banks can do maybe 3-5 years, we have the capacity to extend it to 15 years for them based on our credit solutions that we offer. So there is capacity to do some of these things. Nigeria has come a long way, and we can continue to do what we've done before. So I open the floor to questions now. How do we start? Is there somebody with a mic? Okay. Okay, so you can use the one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Barbara James, consultant to the World Bank on infrastructure financing. In light of the depth of our infrastructure deficit, we need to scale the activities we've heard about today. We've heard from development finance institutions, the NSIA, the CBN, AFC. We've heard from the government, the ministers. One thing that seems to be lacking is our private infrastructure investors. And can some of the interventions be used to build up infrastructure investing industry. We are hearing about ministers going to talk to investors directly. There is an industry whose job it is, who are professionals, to access capital both locally and internationally. And I believe that industry needs to be developed and built up in order for us to scale up all these activities.
It's not working. It's not working.
Good morning. My name is Abdul Samad Rabiu, Chairman Board Group. And I would have actually wanted the minister or the ministers to be here for this question. And my question is about the facility or the loan, the $22.7 billion, which I know the Senate has already given the go-ahead. So I just wanted to find out, maybe the CBN governor can answer this. Is it possible maybe to use part of that money for projects that we know could do much cheaper, like the power, plants? For example, the Egyptian model, where Egypt engaged Siemens for a 14.5 gigawatts that was built, within a period of about 3 years, I think, 2-3 years ago, for under 9 billion euros. So my question is, I know the Chinese are, giving this money. Is this money maybe specific to projects from China, or is it possible to use some of that money to go and do projects that we could do much cheaper, like the Beni Saouf project in Egypt, which was done at the cost of just under 9 billion euros for 14.5 gigawatts. So I know that some of the projects that, we're using this money for are quite good projects. But then again, I believe that if we can get 14 to 15 gigawatts, which is 15,000 megawatts for under $9 billion, it would definitely help as part of the $22.5 billion or $22.7 billion that we're getting from the Chinese. I know that, some of that money is going to Mambila, maybe digitization of NTA and others. But then again, I'm sure if we can get the Chinese to, part with some of that money to go and do projects, especially from Europe, it would go a long way in getting some of these very important projects done in Nigeria. Mr. Emefiele, I don't know whether you can shed a bit more light on my question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That question is actually meant for finance and power, but I take your point that it will have cheaper alternatives and that will deliver exactly the same or even better options that that you have suggested. I think it's something that we can take on board. Unfortunately, they are not here, but it's maybe one of those messages that we can put in writing for us to think of to think of this. But the important thing is, as long as there are better, cheaper options, rather than the Chinese insisting that you must, because the funds are coming from them, and that all the conditions were tied around using them and the rest of them, I think those are some of the things we can take out of the box of the 22.5 and being able to think of other alternative options that is better for the country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think my own one is to the Minister of Transport. Unfortunately, he's not here, but I know that he'll get the message. And also one is to Oji. One, I think the government should not really get involved with building deep sea ports, especially the one in Boni or Port Harcourt to Warri, the rail link, because I don't really know what is the purpose, because we have a lot of ports. They are underutilized, especially the southern ports. If we want to really build them, we should allow, private sector to do that under concessions. I think that would be much better. If it makes any commercial sense, they will go ahead and do it. That's one. Uche, I think what you are doing on the roads is fantastic, but please try and look at doing concrete roads. Not that I'm trying to market my cement, because majority of these bitumen roads in Nigeria, they don't last. That's number one. Number two, when you are doing concrete roads, they last over 50, 60 years. Okay, because you can go and see the one that we're building, which is under the tax credit scheme, from Apapa, the entire Apapa road network, up to the toll gate between Lagos and Ogun State. And that road can last minimum 100 years. Will not be around all of us by that time. But I think it is the best way to go. You can go and have a look at it. And I can assure you, these roads that you are building, before end of this administration, you'll go back and spend a lot of money for repairs. So please look into doing concrete roads. They are even cheaper. And then it's 100% Nigerian. There's nothing imported. The cement is local. The iron roads is local. So, you create a lot of jobs. Thank you.
Yeah. Question here. Question here.
Yes?
Yeah.
Last two questions.
Okay. Yes, I was going to address the issue of the legal and regulatory framework under which many of these PPPs that are envisaged will operate. Because I'm sure, as the CBN and perhaps Uche can confirm, a lot of the issues we have with PPPs are the refusal on the part of government, the sanctity of contracts, to respect the sanctity of contracts. It is hurting investment decisions. It is raising up insurance for businesses coming to Nigeria. So it adds to your overall cost and makes you uncompetitive. Now, take the power sector, for example. There were contracts that were agreed, but not one set of the obligations have been met. And yet there are expectations on the part of the populace that after privatization there should be certain deliveries. And I wish the Minister of Justice was here. This forum going forward should have a strong legal content, because what threatens most of the things we're talking about today would be the litigations. As I speak to you today, there are litigations on NITEL, and the CBN is facing garnishee orders on its accounts on account of, can you imagine, NITEL? The PNID, that's how we got here. So we need some degree of continuity and certainty in the legal and regulatory framework. And the fact that you are government doesn't mean you should not respect contracts. It comes back one way or the other to hurt every one of us.
Thank you, Judge. Yeah. Hajara, last question, quickly.
Hello.
Look.
Is that the last question? Okay, am I allowed to talk now? He's pointing at someone else. Okay, I want to say a good morning to everyone, and I want to congratulate the CBN governor and all of us here. I think that is a good thing that we have started talking again. We've been waiting for meetings to start talking. Please, let this not stop. Let there be continuity. Let there be sections. Let's start to talk. I was shocked to see a sanitizer made in China. What's that?
Thank you. Can you have a question, please?
Our warehouses are filled up with sanitizer. My name is Stella Okoli, the founder of EMSO Pharmaceutical Industries. I have been manufacturing for nearly 40 years. There's no order for sanitizer from CBN. There's no order or inquiry from Ministry of Health. There's no order. So we had a lot of sanitizers. And it is part of the ones we used during Ebola crisis. Local industries must not be neglected. We should find out who is doing what, who has what, who can do what, is not. We should look inwards. We have what it takes to build this nation. Given that you're going to provide the money you say you're going to provide, we trust you will do so. Let's join our hands together and build Nigeria. We have the brains, we have the people, we have those that are very committed to Nigeria. That's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So quickly.
Good morning. Hajara Adeola, MD Lotus Capital. Given everything we've heard this morning on the challenges of raising finance and infrastructure, I'm wondering if AFC, NSIA, and other such entities, why they're not looking at using Sukuk as a vehicle for leveraging some of these assets. Two reasons. One, it democratizes direct individual investment in Nigerian infrastructure, and we shouldn't underestimate the patriotic impact of that. And the second is that it has an added benefit of financial inclusion. And I think we've seen with the Sukuk Roads project by the federal government that is a very powerful tool for raising financing and delivering on projects for this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, we consider Sukuk and we will continue to use Sukuk. So I think that we have done a couple of transactions with Sukuk to fund infrastructure. We'll continue to do that. So thank you very much for the participation.
Well, let me really apologize to Mrs. Stella Okoli. The fact that she finds in this room Chinese-made sanitizers. We'll now proceed with the logistics for the syndicate work, and indeed many interesting insights have been expressed, but like the Honorable Minister said, we do not intend to waste this crisis. So we'll be talking about the work that will be done in syndicate groups. We've already distributed the handout, but basically what we want to do is split ourselves into 8 groups which have already been identified. These groups will identify bankable projects with the biggest multiplier effect on jobs, growth, development, and people. The other thing is, like has also been said, the groups will be additional and complementary to existing projects. We know that, and the
course, will be on a 4 to 5 year time frame, with priority given to quick wins and what we can do in 90 days, what we can start in 90 days. There is a framework that has been suggested. In each group, you have a leader who is supposed to provide direction for the group, and you also have work. They will ensure that we are following the right process in terms of timing, brainstorming according to the various stages that we identified in the guidelines. Now, the group will, of course...
Well, in addition to recommendations and suggestions made by discussants and panelists in this round table, the group will be broken into syndicate sessions where discussants will look at other areas of the economy to explore, to create some kind of buffer to keep the nation's economy afloat in the face of dwindling fortunes of the oil sector. Areas to explore will include the creative industry, manufacturing, agriculture, and agricultural value chain. Of course, discussants will also look at opportunities available in transportation, especially rail, ports, and airports. The panelists will also look at areas such as manufacturing with particular interest on low cost of production. Infrastructure development is another key area that syndicate groups will consider. Now, all of these will be aggregated and submitted to the president as alternative to oil industry. This is a time for Nigeria to walk the talk away from the oil and gas industry. That's much we take on this live telecast of the Central Bank Going for Growth Roundtable. Stay with us on the NTA for continuation of our programs. On behalf of the outside broadcast team, my name is Sonenge Fanfi saying thank you for joining us today.
All persons arriving from China or any country that has a major outbreak is advised, if they have no symptoms at all, to self-isolate, meaning that they stay indoors in their homes for at least 2 weeks. And if they develop any symptoms, like cough, catarrh, sneezing, breathing difficulties within this period, to report to the nearest health facility. We're also advising all airlines to report any case of a passenger falling sick on board before the plane lands. That is a requirement in the agreement. Nigeria Port Health Services and Nigeria Center for Disease Control are on alert at our airports and other points of entry.